Now, at the end of the century, with arguably the three biggest franchises coming to an end, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and to some extent Avengers, I kind of started to think about how they approached that storytelling and how they started to construct these huge stories that span throughout movies and seasons. Now, writers usually fall into a spectrum from planner to discovery writer. Planner, as the name says, is the one who usually plans ahead. They have bullet points, they have outlines, they have, scenes written in already what is gonna happen, and they know how the story will start and how it will end. Now, whereas discovery writers, they usually have maybe an idea or theme or characters in mind, but they don't really have a rigid outline. They don't know where the story is gonna go, and they just start writing and figure it out on the way. So one of the strengths in planner mode is the fact that you usually write amazing climaxes because you know where you're going. Whereas discovery writer usually has better characterization than the planner, because planner is more interested in the plot and how the plot progresses, whereas the discovery writer kind of works with his or her characters so that the characters kind of drove the plot along, and because of the characters the plot happens, but at the same time they have a little bit of difficulties knowing how the story will end, so they might have that little bit, I wouldn't say let down endings, but not maybe as climactic as the planner has. But of course, like I said, most people are on the spectrum. Nobody's like fully one and fully one. When you know where you kind of land, it helps you along and understanding your own method of writing. Now, why these franchises in particular made me think about this is basically because they have so different approach to their storytelling and how they started to construct their stories. And now take into consideration, I don't know, the whole story behind the scenes. And this is basically what I have gathered from the internet and basically through internet osmosis. Let's start from the latest one, Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. Now, I would categorize this as kind of discovery writing. What I have gathered, they did not have an outline, they didn't have a plan in place for all three movies. Now, this is quite a dangerous way to start building a big trilogy, especially one like Star Wars. It's not impossible, but quite dangerous. Like J.J. Abrams in the beginning, he obviously had ideas, themes in mind that he wanted to explore, but he didn't have an outline. He didn't have a guideline of how these things will progress during the next movies. And hence, when they changed directors in the middle, Rian Johnson now had new ideas, new themes he wanted to explore, and no guideline to follow. So now we had two discovery writers that basically both set up the world, and neither had any guidelines to follow, and neither gave guidelines to the next one. So without a guideline, you kind of notice this problem where they're introducing things in The Force Awakens, then they drop them to Last Jedi and introduce new things, and then again in The Rise of Skywalker they drop things that might have been introduced in Last Jedi and pick up things that might have been introduced in Force Awakens. So you notice that there's no coherency and there was no plan in place. And hence we got quite incoherent mess. The three movies do not flow naturally together at all. Say what you want about the prequels, they had a beginning, middle and end, and they followed one another quite naturally. You can see that Lucas had like an arc in mind for all three movies and arc for each movie. So they feel a coherent trilogy, whereas this new one doesn't. Now, Game of Thrones almost had the complete opposite problem. And now when I'm talking about the Game of Thrones problems, I'm gonna talk about the season that didn't have books to guide them anymore. when they only had plot lines that they knew that they need to hit. Okay? So basically, because they had the outline that R.R. Martin might have gave them of what is gonna happen, they stick to it too much. And let me explain why that is a bad thing. It's basically because they had changed so much from the books already. They had left out characters, they have changed arcs, they have changed people's motivations. So when they started to follow the outline too much, it started to feel that the characters and the plot didn't make any sense anymore. They didn't move in a natural order. Good story would always go, this happens, therefore that happens, therefore that, it has a natural flow to it, because this happens, therefore that happens, that kind of flow. Whereas Game of Thrones now had this happened, then that happened, then that happened. And it didn't have a connective tissue, like why? Why did it? And the characters made weird choices based on what we already knew about them. They kind of lost their characterization because the writers needed to hit the plot points that they had. So it's basically character goes here, does that, and then goes there, does that. And it felt throughout the season 7 and 8 that it's basically everything happens because the writers said so. Not because the characters would naturally chose that path to take. Well then, how does Avengers Endgame fit in? And MCU in general? Well, in my opinion, their approach to this project was kind of in the middle, leaning to the planner side. They have had their own kind of trilogies, like Captain America had 3 movies, Iron Man had 3 movies, Thor had 3 movies. The Guardians of the Galaxy will have 3 movies, but at the moment 2. And then they had their standalones, and then they had the big combining movies, the Avenger movies. They had plan in place for how the movies will connect to one another, what will happen in each movie, and how it all is gonna end. So they knew that they were building up to the Infinity Wars, and they knew that, okay, we have to introduce these elements on these movies, like the Infinity Stones in these ones. So they had a plan in place, but at the same time they were quite flexible with it, because when new writers, new directors came in, they had their own visions and they had maybe new ideas, and they were allowed to express those ideas to some extent. And also the fact that they had the phase system kind of helped them to, recoup every other phase. So if they had made changes to, for example, Captain America's character in phase 1, they could then, add that to phase 2, and now they have an outline. Okay, this is the outline for Captain America now. We kind of a little bit change that over here. Or if they are killing characters, well, in Marvel nobody dies. But yeah, so basically, they had this plan, but they were also changing it as they go along and refining and, just making changes and, tuning it a little bit. Of course, with Marvel too, even with the plan in place, they had slip-ups here and there. There is some characterization that is off from movie to movie. But I think because they had this plan in place that they were also flexible with, they were able to make quite coherent universe of movies, and there's so many movies that it's quite remarkable how well they kind of flow together, and they don't feel like as jarring as Star Wars or the last seasons of Game of Thrones. So they didn't fall into those pitfalls. They do have pitfalls here and there. I'm not saying it's perfect. So what's my point here? Well, I don't think I have one. I just wanted to examine how you kind of approach big project and how you might want to approach them. So I don't think any method is better than another, but as you might have gathered from what I have said, I kind of feel that when you have a massive project spanning many movies or seasons or books or whatever, have a plan, but don't get married to it. Understand that as you go along, your story might change and you might reach your goal from a different direction, Or sometimes you want to change your goal and you kind of notice that, okay, this doesn't make any sense anymore. Be kind of prepared to make alterations and don't be afraid of those. This is basically why I wanted to talk about this, is something I struggle myself. I have this huge book series that I want to write, but at the same time I don't feel my skill level is quite there yet. So I want to kind of learn from other people's mistakes and where they go wrong and where they go right, so that I might be able to in the future to avoid the same mistakes. As a storyteller, it's quite scary to notice that even people who have done this for years and have paycheck that, the paychecks are in numbers that I cannot even imagine, and they fuck it up. It kind of scares me, because how can I do any better? But at the same time, I'm just, like I said, trying to understand where they went wrong and what mistakes you want to avoid as you do your bigger projects. And I think everybody who likes storytelling and wants to be a storyteller in some shape or form should always kind of look at other people's work and think about like where and why the problems occurred and what are the things that you liked and why you like them and how they're accomplished and how they accomplish those things. That's why I kind of started this channel. I'm just so interested in how you tell your stories, and there's no right answers. Everybody has different things that work for themselves. As a writer, you might, like I said, you might be a planner or discovery writer. It doesn't really matter. Especially in small one book or one movie project, either one can work perfectly. There's no shame on being the one or the other. But I kind of wanted to just explore the bigger projects, because then you kind of have to understand what you're up against and what you want to accomplish. I'm probably gonna do a little bit more these kind of examinations of storytelling, or maybe some storytelling tropes or whatnot. I like them. I there's a lot of trope talks that I like to watch, and it's kind of fascinating to break down stories to their elements and core level and understand why they work or why they do not work. So I'm gonna leave you for Christmas and New Year's, and I'm gonna be back after the New Year's. I hope you have a nice end of the decade. And do you want to say bye-bye too? Peikko is gonna say bye-bye. Peikko. Okay. No. No, it doesn't want to say bye-bye. Peikko. Okay. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's, and I'm gonna see you next year. Okay. Bye.